Have you ever thought about like hidden groups? You know, people whose real identity is kind of hinted at in the Bible. Today we're going deep, really deep into one theory about one of these groups, the hidden ones, and their possible connection to biblical prophecy.
Fascinating stuff. It goes way beyond, just reading the surface.
For sure.
We're identifying the true people of the Bible to guide us.
Okay, so this source jumps right into Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
Specifically, chapter 28. It talks about the blessings and curses, laid out for the Israelites.
Right.
What's the significance of this chapter? Like, how does it help us understand this hidden ones idea?
Well, Deuteronomy 28 is really important because it lays out this framework for understanding the idea of a chosen people, a people bound by a covenant with God.
I see.
It explores what might happen, the consequences, if you stick to or stray from this covenant.
Okay.
And that really sets the stage for a narrative that unfolds, throughout history, really.
Yeah. And some of those consequences, the curses, they're like really intense.
Yeah.
Scattered across the earth, becoming like a proverb for bad luck, serving other gods.
Right.
It paints a pretty bleak picture.
It does. The language is very stark. Like, for instance, it describes the chosen people being scattered, like among all the nations, and becoming, a source of astonishment, a hissing, a byword even. And it's fascinating how some scholars see these curses as connected to the historical experience of the African diaspora.
Wow, that's a powerful connection. Can you unpack that a little bit? How do these specific curses, like the scattering one, connect to the African diaspora?
Well, think about the transatlantic slave trade. It forcibly displaced millions of Africans, ripped them from their homeland.
Right.
And this scattering that's prophesied in Deuteronomy, according to this theory, it finds an echo in this tragic part of history.
Wow.
It's like the prophecy foreshadowed this immense suffering, this displacement that would become like a defining feature of the African diaspora.
Okay, so if we kind of accept this connection, between the curses and the historical experience of the African diaspora, where does the term hidden ones actually come into play?
Right, that's where Psalm 83 kind of adds another layer to our deep dive.
Okay.
It talks about a plot against God's hidden ones. Like a deliberate attempt to erase their identity, to prevent them from existing as a nation.
I see.
And the language in the psalm about this deliberate suppression, the erasure of identity, it really resonates with what happened, to those who were stripped of their heritage and culture during the transatlantic slave trade.
So we're seeing this potential link then, right, between these hidden ones, the curses of Deuteronomy, and the historical experience of the African diaspora. But is there like a specific verse that ties this scattering to the transatlantic slave trade?
There is. The source points to a particularly, chilling passage. In Deuteronomy 28, it mentions being taken into bondage by ships. And this verse, it really resonates with that historical reality of, millions being forcibly taken across the ocean during the slave trade.
It's hard not to be struck by how direct that language is, taken into bondage by ships, and how it seems to like foreshadow the method of transportation used during the slave trade.
Yeah.
This connection makes me wonder, is the source suggesting that the African diaspora, whose history is marked by this displacement and oppression, might actually be the hidden ones spoken of in the Bible?
That is the big question this source is exploring. And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll really examine this idea in more detail, and uncover what it might mean. We'll also look at if there are other interpretations of these verses and what those might mean for how we understand, history and identity.
That's good.
It's easy to get kind of caught up in all the historical parallels and the mysteries surrounding the hidden ones.
Yeah.
But the real power of this deep dive, I think, is in what it means for us, today.
You're right. It's one thing to see the connections between like prophecy and history.
Right.
But it's another to really grasp what those connections mean for how we see the world ourselves even.
Exactly.
So if we entertain this idea that the African diaspora represents these hidden ones, what does that mean for how we understand identity, both individual and collective,
So it challenges us to look beyond like the surface level, of race and ethnicity and culture. It suggests that there's this spiritual dimension to identity.
Okay.
Like this concept of a people chosen and connected by something deeper than just shared history or genetics.
So it's not just about recognizing the the historical injustices, right,
Yeah.
that the African diaspora has faced.
Yeah.
But it's also about recognizing a potential for something more, something greater, like a spiritual restoration.
Exactly, precisely. The source points to Ezekiel 37, the vision of the dry bones, as this powerful metaphor for this idea of revival. Those dry bones, scattered, lifeless, they're brought back together and filled with breath.
Right.
And a lot of people interpret that as symbolizing a spiritual awakening, a return to wholeness.
That's a vivid image for sure. But some might ask, like, how does that translate into action in the real world? I mean, what does restoration actually look like for people who have experienced, well, centuries of oppression and dispossession?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And while the source doesn't give us like concrete solutions, it does provide a framework for thinking about restoration.
Yeah.
Like Deuteronomy 30.3-5, it speaks of God gathering his scattered people, turning their captivity and having compassion on them.
This idea of turning their captivity, it makes me think about the different sides of restoration.
Yeah.
Is it about literally returning to a physical land? Or is it something more metaphorical, like reclaiming cultural heritage and identity?
Yeah, that's a key distinction to make. The concept of restoration that's presented here suggests a multi-layered process,
Right.
like reconnecting with one's spiritual roots, reclaiming lost cultural knowledge and practices, and ultimately, rediscovering a sense of purpose and destiny.
So it sounds like restoration is about more than just going back to a place, right?
Right.
It's about a deeper sense of belonging, reclaiming your heritage, experiencing healing and restoration on different levels. It's a lot to unpack.
Absolutely. And it's not just about, the hidden ones themselves. This deep dive has me thinking about, our responsibility, our collective responsibility.
That good.
If we accept this connection, how do we acknowledge their story? How do we contribute to this process of restoration?
This source it's making me confront my own assumptions about identity and history, It's clear that recognizing this connection, that's crucial. But what does action actually look like? Is it about, supporting organizations that work towards social justice, or engaging in dialogue about these issues, or something else entirely?
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting. The source doesn't tell us exactly what to do, but it encourages us to wrestle with these questions.
I see.
It's like a call to awareness.
Yeah.
It's prompting us to find our own ways to contribute to healing and reconciliation. Maybe it starts with education, advocacy, or simply just acknowledging the historical injustices that the African diaspora has faced.
It's thought-provoking how this deep dive, it's not just about uncovering, some hidden truth.
Right.
It's about inspiring action. But what about those who might have been responsible for these curses in the first place? Does the source give any insight into reconciliation and healing between, different groups?
That's an important question. While the source mostly focuses on the hidden ones themselves, I think it's fair to say that reconciliation is kind of implied in this broader message of restoration.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
healing the wounds of the past, it often involves, acknowledging the harm that's been done and seeking forgiveness and understanding.
That makes sense. So if the curses, that are outlined in Deuteronomy have manifested throughout history,
Right.
does that mean that the prophecies of restoration, do they hold the same weight? Could they have the same potential for being realized?
No, those are questions that we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. We'll examine those prophecies a little more closely and think about what they might mean for the future of the hidden ones.
Okay.
And maybe, for all of us.
Okay, so we've explored this potential connection, between biblical prophecy and the African diaspora.
Okay.
We examined those curses and like their historical parallels. Now, I'm really curious about those prophecies of restoration we talked about. What can you tell us about them?
Well, what's fascinating is that they operate on multiple levels. So yes, there's the potential for like a physical restoration.
Okay.
Maybe a return to a place of origin.
Right.
But it goes way deeper than that.
I see.
The text hints at a much more profound transformation.
So it's not just about geography.
Not entirely, no. Deuteronomy 30.3-5, it talks about God turning their captivity and having compassion.
Right.
And it points to this spiritual and emotional restoration, like a healing of the wounds, inflicted by generations of trauma and oppression.
It's easy to see how that aspect of restoration would be just as, if not more important than just a physical return.
Yeah.
But what does that kind of profound healing actually look like? How do you restore something that's been, well, broken for so long?
That's where the analogy of the dry bones in Ezekiel 37 becomes so powerful.
Oh,
Remember those bones? They're scattered and lifeless. They represent a people who have been, well, stripped of their identity, their hope, their very sense of being. But when God breathes life into them, they're not just, revived physically. They're brought back together as this unified whole.
So restoration isn't just about individuals healing. It's about a collective reawakening.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming a shared heritage, rebuilding communities, and reestablishing, a sense of collective purpose. It's about rediscovering that strength and beauty of a shared identity.
This concept of a collective reawakening, it's fascinating. But I have to ask, if these prophecies are about more than just a physical return, what does that mean for the future of the hidden ones? I mean, some people might interpret this as predicting like a mass exodus, a return to a specific place. Is that what the source suggests?
The source it's actually pretty open-ended in that regard. It doesn't lay out a specific course of action or a defined endpoint.
I see.
It focuses more on the transformative power of these prophecies, the potential for healing and renewal, both individually and collectively.
So it's not necessarily about everyone packing their bags and going back to a specific location. It's more about this internal shift, a spiritual homecoming, and a rediscovery of their heritage.
That seems to be the core message. It's about reclaiming your identity, embracing your heritage, and stepping into a future where the wounds of the past, they don't define you anymore.
That's incredibly inspiring. But I keep coming back to the idea of the curses. If we're exploring the idea that they manifested in a very real way, what does that mean for the prophecies of restoration? Do they carry the same weight, the same potential for being realized in a concrete way?
That is a powerful question.
Yeah.
And I think it's one that each listener needs to wrestle with on their own.
Yeah.
The source doesn't give a definite answer.
Yeah.
But it does present this compelling case for considering that these prophecies could actually manifest in our world.
It's a lot to ponder for sure. And honestly, it's making me think about the power of prophecy, not just as like a prediction of the past, but as a potential guide for the future. This whole conversation has been a real eye-opener, to say the least.
And that's the beauty of engaging with these ancient texts and the theories around them.
Yeah.
They offer us this timeless wisdom. They challenge our assumptions, and they invite us to envision a future where healing and restoration aren't just possibilities, but active forces shaping our world.
This deep dive has been, well, quite the journey. We started with a mystery. We explored some challenging historical parallels, and we ended up contemplating a future filled with hope and the potential for transformation.
If I were to offer a final thought, it would be this. Regardless of your background, your beliefs, or how you understand history, the story of the hidden ones invites us all to reflect on the power of identity, the resilience of the human spirit, and the potential for restoration, both within ourselves and in the world around us.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the implications of this deep dive. Keep digging, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.